Well, welcome back to our Self-Helpless series. We've been doing this for a few weeks now. We're continuing on this morning. My name is Andrew. I'm one of the pastors here at Renew Church. And I'm excited to teach this morning on another mantra, a self-help mantra that a lot of us are familiar with. Just to back us up a little bit, we've been talking about this self-help stuff for a couple of reasons. And one of the primary reasons is because we see a lot of good that comes out of the self-help movement, some of the good that comes out of self-help culture. But what we've also seen, at least in our experience, is that sometimes the whole self-help stuff actually ends up hurting people a little bit more than it actually helps them. Pastor Wade opened up our series a few weeks ago, and I would suggest after this you go back and you watch that. I think he did an excellent job framing the conversation that we want to have this morning. And one of the things that Pastor Wade said was that we actually value self-help when it's in reference to self-care. We actually believe in that. It's a very biblical thing. It's a good thing, and we encourage that. And so self-help, self-care can be a really, really positive thing, and so we don't demean that or downplay that. But he also said that sometimes when we focus a little bit too much on the self, it ends up hurting us. It can be anti-help. It can leave us helpless or make us be harmful to us, make us feel vulnerable. I was thinking last week, I was wrestling with some stuff myself as I was prepping and I was thinking about this stuff. And I know for myself that this stuff really does affect me. I'm the kind of personality that loves to take in a bunch of different content all the time. And what ends up happening to me in my life is I learn one thing or I listen to one thing or I read some principle in a book and then I get so excited about it and I think that's the thing that has to change and I'm going to change it now and it's going to be great. It's going to change my life. And then that vigor and that passion lasts a week. And it's not that passion vigor drops off the map. It's that I actually just learn something else, or I take in something new, or I read another book, or I listen to another podcast that's emphasizing something else. And so what I end up doing is I put that thing that I originally came to on the back burner, and I pick up this new thing. And then what ends up happening over time is I've got all these self-help projects. It's like the kind of guy who's renovating his house, and he's half done his whole house, but his whole house is never done. And I just find myself in these places where it actually ends up leaving me miserable. It leaves me stressed. It leaves me insecure, feeling like I can't gain victory in anything. I can't grow in any way. I just feel like I'm in the same spot I've always been because I'm not finishing any projects. And Pastor Wade actually mentioned that that's one of the worst parts of the self-help culture is constantly going after something new. He actually quoted this. He said, we're living in an age of perfectionism, and perfectionism is actually what kills us. And there's another quote he said, people are suffering and dying under the torture of the fantasy self that they're failing to become. And I don't know, there's not many more quotes that describe me as a 29-year-old who loves this kind of stuff, who really is into the self-help stuff than that. I'm suffering and dying under the torture of the fantasy of the self that I'm constantly failing to become. And I wonder if that's actually you as well. And if it is, I think that this morning and this whole series is actually going to be helpful and interesting to you. Pastor Wade framed the conversation in three lenses. The first lens was that self-help focuses a little bit too much on the self, and I believe that that's true. He also said that it buys into the myth of control. There's an assumption with self-help that you actually have control over a lot more that you may not actually have control over. And the third thing he said is that self-help often leaves God out of the picture. And as a Christian church, we don't think that's always the most helpful thing to do. We want to bring everything to a worldview that includes a God who changes things. And so this morning, we're continuing that series, and today we're discussing the topic of, or the mantra of surround yourself with positive people. That's what we're saying this morning. Surround yourself with positive people. And we're going to look at this mantra. We're going to see what's good about it. We're going to see what's bad about it. We're going to see what's helpful, and we're going to see what's unhelpful. And then we'll end today just looking at the Jesus ethic. We really do want to look at everything through the lens of what we think Jesus, how Jesus would look at it. And so we're going to jump in this morning. We're talking about the mantra of surround yourself with positive people. And the idea is that if you surround yourself, or you have this mentality that you're constantly going to invite people into your life that are positive influences on you, that have good things to bring to your life, then that's actually what's going to be best for you. You've heard this mantra said in a few different ways. Maybe you've heard it said like this: surround yourself with better people than you to make you better. Maybe you've heard it in the context of the business world or the marketplace or the corporate world. They would say things like success breeds success, and if you want to be successful, then you'll need to surround yourself with people who are more successful than you. In relationships or in a spiritual sense, we maybe have heard it taught in church or in youth group or in Sunday school that in order to be a more moral person, to make good choices, then we should spend most of our time with people who are moral and make good choices. And maybe you've heard it said like this: be the type of, maybe you've heard it said like this, cut out toxic people. Have you heard that before? I hear that all the time now. It feels like there's this common trend that people are saying, hey, if you got toxic people in your life, you need to cut them out because they're not healthy for you. They're not good for you. Just cut them right out, and that's ultimately what's best for you. I remember in youth group, I don't know if anybody else did this exercise in youth group, but when I was in youth group, there was an exercise that we would do that would show a picture of this. And what they would do in our youth group is they would pick the tallest, strongest boy in the group, which usually was me, and they would say, stand up on a chair. And so I'd stand up on a chair or a box, and then they would find kind of the smallest, shortest, kind of quote-unquote weakest person in the room, and they would have them stand beside me on the floor. And what they would challenge me to do is to try to lift that person up from the floor onto the chair. At the same time, they would challenge the person on the floor to try to pull me down to the floor level with them. And it was this picture of it's a lot easier for negative people to pull you down than it is for you as a positive person to pull people up. And so the idea is if you're surrounded constantly by people who are on the ground and you think you're doing them a service by helping them up, most of the time they're probably pulling you down. And I think there's some truth to that. I think that we've experienced that in our own life. I know I've experienced that. It's partly true, and I would actually suggest this morning that it's even partially biblical. And we're going to look at that a little bit this morning. Check out some of these wisdom sayings in the book of Proverbs. This is ancient wisdom, like 3,000 years old, that people use today still. Look at this. Proverbs 13:20, it says, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. And that's an ancient proverb that we believe in. It's in the Bible. So it says, look, surround yourself with wise people if you want to be wise. If you hang out with fools, it's going to hurt you, and it's not going to help you very much. So don't do that. The other proverb here, it says, Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. The idea there is that you're ultimately going to become like the people who are around you. They're either going to sharpen you in one way or another way. That's what's going to happen. And so if you want to grow and become wise and become smart and become successful and be sharpened in the right way, you need to be around a bunch of iron that's going to get you there. Otherwise, the people are going to lead you to become a person that you don't want to be. And so these are biblical principles. These are biblical truths. Surround yourself with positive people. Here's something from the New Testament. It's 1 Corinthians 5:11. This is the Apostle Paul, and he's writing to the church in Corinth. He says, but now I'm writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or slanderer, a drunkard or swindler. Don't even eat with such people. This is Paul, and we know Paul loves people, and we know Paul wrote so much stuff about unity and hanging out with sinners, and he followed Jesus, and he encouraged that. But he's even saying here, look, don't associate with certain people, especially if they claim to be a brother or sister, if they're going to continue to live a negative life, a toxic life. And so you can almost sum this up, or some would sum this up, and they would say something like, cut out deceitful and toxic people from your life. And they would say, look, it's biblical. It's right there. In Galatians 5:9, it says this, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And the idea there is that just a little bit of leaven in the dough actually leavens the entire thing. And so if there's a little bit of negativity in the community, it actually hurts the whole community. Paul's saying this in reference to bad teaching, false teaching in a church. And he says, look, you need to get that stuff out of there because it actually affects everyone around you. So it seems as though this is not totally an anti-biblical idea. It seems like Paul himself and some of the ancient Proverbs would suggest that we should surround ourselves with positive people. We should cut out toxicity, negative and bad, and we should invite in good. See, there's sincere wisdom in this mantra, and all the mantras that we're talking about, there's sincere wisdom in them. There's truth to them. There's lots of truth in them, and so we don't want to write them off like we said. But are there problems with it as well? How far can we take it? Is it going to leave us in a helpful, healthy place if we follow it to its logical end? Or if we aren't wise about it, is it going to leave us in a weird spot that isn't all that helpful, that's actually hurtful? Let me ask you a couple questions. Something that we've been liking to do is on these Sunday mornings is do a self-audit. We've been encouraging people to look within and think about these things a little bit deeper. So here's some self-audit questions for you in regards to this mantra of surround yourself with positive people. Let me ask you this. How do you know that you're not the toxic person that people should cut out of their life? What makes you assume that you're not the toxic person, that you are the positive person? And let me ask you this, if you were, or they considered you that, how would that actually make you feel? What about this? What makes you think that you're positive enough to be in the presence of other positive people who are trying to live out this mantra? You see, if they're more positive than you, then they shouldn't be surrounded by you. So what makes you think you're positive enough to be around them? And is that fair to you? I think this is a better question. Is it even responsible to categorize people into positive and negative, or positive and toxic? Are there really positive people and toxic people, and everybody fits into one of those two categories? Is that responsible? Is that a responsible way to think about people? Let me ask you this. Can negative people ever change? Have you ever seen a quote-unquote toxic person actually change into something positive? If that can happen, then how would that ever happen if they're relegated to the negative people, to the toxic people? How can we see people actually change? I also wonder, what constitutes a positive person? Is it a person who never tells you you're wrong? Is it a person who never challenges your perspective or your worldview? Is it a person who's always affirming and always encouraging and never suggests that something might need to change? Is that what we think about positive? Sometimes I think that's what we think of as positive. We think of that's the most loving thing, is don't challenge anybody or suggest anything otherwise. But is that good for you? Do you actually believe that? Is positive always the most helpful? You see, I've seen some of the most positive people in my life be the most hurtful people in my life. The quote-unquote positive people who just allow people to continue to hurt them, the most positive people who allow people to continue to live in a way that's actually not helpful to them, and they enable behaviors that are actually not that helpful for other people. And so how do we think of this positive, negative worldview and how people fit into it? Is the truth always what's most positive? Or does it feel positive? I think it's helpful to take it back to what Pastor Wade addressed in week 1 as one of the primary problems with self-help culture. Wade brought it back and he kind of suggested that most of self-help is just straight up selfishness. And I think when we think about this mantra itself, it isn't anything more than just utter selfishness, isn't it? Think about it this way. You get to determine who's positive. Right? So you can choose that, and then you get to pick who you spend your time with. And the whole point of doing that is for you. Does that not just utter selfishness? Like, why do you deserve that right over somebody else? At Renew Church, we genuinely believe in centering everything that we do and all of our teachings on the example of Jesus. We believe that. We're a church, and we're unashamed about that. We believe that Jesus is the true north. We believe that he's the one we follow. We believe that he is wisdom personified. We believe that he is God in flesh. And so this morning, where I want to take us is towards the teachings of Jesus and see how Jesus may have thought about this or how Jesus may have lived his life out in regards to the people he decided to spend his time with, who Jesus surrounded himself by. And there's 3 principles, I think, that are connected to some of these texts that we're going to look at this morning. The Jesus principle number 1 that I think we see very clearly in the teachings of Jesus. Don't make blanket judgments of people. Don't make blanket judgments of people. People are not to be categorized into negative and positive, into toxic or positive. People are more than that. They're more nuanced than that. We see this teaching in Matthew 7, 1-5. Check this out. It says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured against you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye?" Jesus says, "You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly enough to remove the speck from your brother's eye." These are the words of Jesus. This is what Jesus is saying. This is what Jesus is suggesting here. And so before we start making some sweeping conclusions and generalizations about people and categorizing them, I think the Jesus thing to do would be to stop and take a long, really hard, fairly sincere, and honest look at ourselves. You can go ahead and pull out that accountability mirror and stare at it for a while. Jesus calls us to do that first, and probably first, second, and third before we start categorizing people in a certain way and living out the simple mantra of surround yourself with positive people. The second thing that I think Jesus would suggest, and this is the Jesus principle number 2, is that the negative you're trying to cut out is often internal, not external. Let me say that again. The negative in your life, the toxic in your life that you feel needs to be cut out is probably, or at least most of the time, it's internal. It's not external. Check out what Jesus says in Mark 7, 20-23. He says this. He went on, "What comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside a person, and they defile a person." You see, the people you're surrounding yourself with may not be helping your cause. They may not be supporting the change that you need in your life. They may be contributing to it being more difficult for you to actually grow in the way that you're called to grow, to overcome the sin in your life. But once again, Jesus says, look, grab that accountability mirror and stare at it for a long time. You see, if you lack self-discipline, it's not because the people you're surrounded by lack self-discipline. It actually comes from within you. If you keep stumbling upon sinful habits, that's because your own heart is corrupt and your lifestyle choices are not helpful. They're hedonistic. That's from within, my friends. That's not because your friends live that way. If you can't keep up with your neighbors, if you're looking across the street at your neighbors, the Joneses, and they have all these nice things, they got the new car, they got the addition to the house, they've got the nice pool, they've got all this stuff, and you're going into debt just to keep up with those next to you, guess what? It's not because you live next to the Joneses. It's not their fault. It's actually from within. It's your own greed. It's your own jealousy. It's your own envy. It's from within. The scalpel may not need to be applied to the company that you're surrounded by. It may actually need to be applied to you. At least that's what Jesus would suggest based on his teachings here. And the Jesus principle number 3, toxic people help you live out your true purpose and calling in life, which is to selflessly serve others and expect nothing in return. This is a Jesus principle. This is, I think, how Jesus would think about this. Check this out in Luke 14, 12-14. It says, "Then Jesus said to his host, 'When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers, or your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. See, what Jesus is saying here is surrounding yourself with all sorts of people who have everything to bless you with and all sorts of ways to benefit you. It may help you get ahead here for a little bit, but it's not going to help you in the future, and it's not going to help you fulfill your calling by God to live selflessly. What Jesus is teaching here is he's showing us that when you are going to bless people and you're going to invite people into your home and you're going to plan events, he's saying, think about the people who can give nothing back to you. Think about the negative people. Think about the toxic people. Think about the people who are broken and who are weary and who are sad, whose life has been way more difficult than yours, who don't have anything to offer you in return, who won't invite you to their banquet. They don't have a home to even host you. They don't have a beautiful backyard for you to come to watch the live stream in, but invite them. They got nothing to give you back. But Jesus, that's where true riches are going to be found. He says, surround yourself with people who God has called you to care for and to serve. I want you to think about this for a second as we come to a close here. Think about Jesus. Imagine Jesus lived out this mantra. Imagine Jesus, the God of the universe, lived out this mantra, and imagine his standard of positivity. The reality is, how well would that go for you? Would you be in Jesus' circle? Would Jesus surround himself with you if Jesus lived this out? It's actually what makes the gospel the most beautiful story in the world. The story of the gospel is that Jesus is the king of the universe, is the God of the universe, and he stepped down from everything he had. He made himself man, and we read even this morning, he made himself lower than the sinners so that you can actually be a part of Jesus' circle. See, Jesus, perfect positivity, everything good, nothing toxic, the standard. He not only stepped down to hang out with you and I, not only stepped down to surround himself with toxic, negative, broken people, he even went a step further. The story is that Jesus actually gave his own life, paid the ultimate sacrifice on the Roman cross, shed his blood, his body was broken, and experienced death so that you can hang out with the positive people, so that you, the broken one, the toxic, the destructive, can actually hang out with God, that you can be called a friend and a child of the living God. That's what the story of the gospel is. And that's what Jesus did for you. At Renew, we are convinced of a couple things. We are convinced that you, everybody, needs consistent and healthy community through regular participation in church community. We believe that everybody should be a part of a Renew group. We believe everybody should be surrounded by quote-unquote positive community, positive people. We believe that. We call you to that. And you may need more of that in your life. You may need to step into the good community that is there for you, the positive people to surround you, especially if you're in a season of life where things are a lot harder, especially if you find yourself struggling with getting ahead. That's what people are supposed to do for one another, and we believe that. Everybody's called to that. But we're also convinced at Renewed Church at the exact same time that you are called to emulate Jesus' example of spending time with the least of these. The toxic in our communities are often just the most broken people. The toxic in our communities are usually the ones who are hungry and you're supposed to feed. They're the ones who have abuse in their life and they just need love and care from healthy, strong people. These are the extra grace required people. These are the people who are hard sometimes to spend time with. They're the ones who sometimes talk a lot in a group setting and might frustrate you. They're the ones who may not have the filter and may say some crazy things. They're the ones who are on the far right or the far left politically, and we all look at it and go, what are you thinking? What is your problem, dude? You frustrate and bother me so much. They're the annoying, they're the rude, they're the ignorant, they're the insensitive, they're the angry, they're the depressed. These are the people that actually Jesus, our Lord and Savior, calls us to spend our time with and surround ourselves with. You see, at Renewed Church, we believe we need to be a community that is being transformed by the grace of God in the context of healthy community, and at the same time, through the transformation of our lives, we're actually able to lead others towards that same transformation and that same love. That's what we're called to. And so when I think about the mantra of surround yourself with positive people, I kind of want to just drop one word. I want to drop positive. Surround yourself with people. You're called to surround yourself with positive, healthy, responsible, wise people. And you're also called to surround yourself with broken, hurting, negative, and toxic people. And you need both in balance to live out your true calling, to get the most meaning and purpose from your life, to see the most impact used from your life. You see, you need them and they need you.